Welcome. I'm Mark Bauerlein, First Things Magazine, here to talk to Charlotte Allen, who has a wonderful essay in the current issue entitled Punching Down. Charlotte is a writer and journalist living in Washington, D.C., covering many topics, including cultural and religious trends and higher education. She has a doctorate in medieval literature from Catholic University, and she is a frequent contributor to the Los Angeles Times, the Weekly Standard, the Wall Street Journal, and many other national periodicals. Welcome, Charlotte. We're glad to have you here.
Good to be here, Mark.
Great. Well, let's get right into the essay. The essay "Punching Down" is the title, and the first question I think we would want to ask here is, what is punching down?
Well, what punching down is basically, it's a term that the left developed, and it has to do with a more privileged group basically attacking a less privileged group on the theory that it can get away with it. And it's often used in the context of white privilege against minorities or men against women. So it's basically kind of an unpunished assault that becomes acceptable, presumably becomes acceptable because the class that's being punched down is so stigmatized.
So punching down is actually the right thing to do.
Well, according to it depends on what side you're on, I would say.
Exactly.
If you're on the left and you think that a woman is being punched down by a man, well, that's bad. But I suppose that if it goes in the other direction, then it's fine.
Right. And it's only going to be fine if the people who are being punched down really they deserve it.
That's right. They're considered to deserve it. No one has any sympathy. The media has the least sympathy of all, so that you can get a punching down situation where the media is all on the side of the puncher. And that's essentially what I've described in my article, is that the people who are being punched down in this case are working class, lower middle class people who are fervent Christians, who have very strong beliefs about, in this case, about same-sex marriage. And they feel that they are being basically persecuted by the left because of their beliefs. Right. And so the press has no sympathy toward evangelical Christians, no sympathy toward working class people who now seem to be everyone's favorite punching bag because they're white, they live in places where nobody goes, rural places, small towns, and so forth, and they're religious, and Christianity, evangelical Christianity, is everyone's favorite religion to punch down.
Right. Well, your prime example in the essay is Kim Davis, the clerk in Kentucky, and I'm so glad that you spent a lot of time on her case, and you gave us some details that I wasn't aware of. And one of the satisfying things about it is because several months before you began working on the essay, I was traveling. I'm in a hotel room, and I turn on the TV, and I get the Bill Maher show, the old formerly politically incorrect fellow. And he had on, I think it was Richard Dawkins and Neil deGrasse Tyson. And then he has his moment where he does his little commentary for the audience. And he begins his commentary with silence and just showing a photograph of Kim Davis. And it could have been her mugshot when she was arrested, when she was taken in. And you can see Kim Davis, she looks kind of worn out. Her long kind of hair looks like it hasn't been washed in a while. And Bill Maher just gets that little smirk on his face. He says nothing. And then he giggles a little bit. And then the audience giggles a little bit. And within 10 seconds, everyone is just laughing simply at this photograph of Kim Davis. And then Bill Maher makes a joke about head lice. And everyone is uproarious over this. And I just thought this, and when I saw the title of your essay, Punching Down, that's it. We're all going to sit around and laugh at this poor, benighted, white trash Christian. And we're all going to feel so good about doing it
at the same time. And so your presentation, I'll ask you to give us some of the details of her case. It was such a nice, it was a nice antidote to that great big collective mockery of another human being.
Oh yeah, it went on for months. I mean, her face was everywhere. I mean, she was the perfect target, having all the, what would you say, the stereotypical characteristics of white trash. As you say, she was overweight. She tended to wear very loose-fitting, baggy clothes because of the Christian church that she belonged to requires women to dress extremely modestly, which basically means long skirts and lots of layers. And so there she was, and of course her hair flying all over the place. Again, her Christian church apparently requires women to wear their hair long, not to cut their hair. Very important. It seems to stem from an interpretation of one of Paul's letters to the Corinthians, where he says that a woman's hair is her crowning glory. She should keep her hair long, and so forth. So there she was, I mean, and no makeup, another manifestation of her beliefs. So there she is. I mean, she was just quintessential people of Walmart, except maybe a more modest version. And so, of course, everybody, all you'd had to do if you were one of those enlightened people was look at her face, look at her body, and laugh. And you can imagine if people were making the same kind of joke about Lena Dunham, who is also overweight and dresses in, at least in my opinion, in a very unattractive, sort of deliberately unattractive fashion. If people laughed at her, then you know that just wouldn't happen. They would be called sexist, misogynist, every single name you can think of. But with Kim Davis, there she was. She was the perfect target, even though, strangely enough, as the county clerk, I think she's making like $80,000 a year, which goes pretty far in a rural setting. She was probably one of the local aristocracy, because where she comes from, Rowan County, Kentucky, is one of the poorest places in America, with a huge number of people living under the poverty line, virtually no industry of any kind. So that too, you see, was part of the Kim Davis gestalt that people could laugh at, these poor white people from these benighted areas.
Right, and what you pulled out of that, I did not know that there was a significant TownGown rift that you could see in the case, because much of the other side, the complainants, were associated with the local university.
That's right, Morehead State University, which is in fact the biggest employer in the county. And it's kind of funny, I discovered this, I was just doing some web research, reading up on the case, when I discovered that one of the plaintiffs, one of the members of the lesbian couple, there were 4 couples who sued, a lesbian couple of gay men, and then 2 heterosexual couples who claimed they couldn't get married because they couldn't get marriage licenses from Kim Davis, who refused to sign the license, invoking her Christian beliefs. But at any rate, I discovered that one of the lesbian pair was a professor at Morehead State. So I thought, well, that's interesting. So then I started looking into the case and discovered that another one of the plaintiffs was a professor at Morehead State. So I just started tracking down and figuring out who worked for who, and it turned out that several people connected with this lawsuit, with this particular lawsuit, and another lawsuit that hasn't really gone anywhere, were either connected to Morehead State. They were employed, they were librarians, graphic designers, or their spouses or partners were employed by other universities. So it was obviously, there was a huge town and gown. It was obvious that this was basically an assault by the liberals at the university against the rubes who live in the rest of Rowan County.
Right.
In fact, there was an article for the Huffington Post while all of this controversy was going on by a woman who had graduated from Morehead State, and she was describing how we're not we're not all like that in Moorhead. You know, some of us are poets and singers, and we care about Appalachian culture and we care about the environment. We're not like those people.
As long as it's not Appalachian Christian evangelical culture.
Oh, that's right. No, that never. That's never. It's kind of funny. Historically, there, as you probably know, there's been a huge kind of literary and artistic and musical interest among the cultured classes in Appalachia. Religion never comes up. You would think that that those people had no religion whatsoever.
I noticed that in another case that you did, the florist in the state of Washington, we had another academic. You had one complainant there,
Right.
and it was an academic couple as well. In fact, it was a gay couple, and one of the men is a vice president at one in the state system, not the
that's
university at the lower level, one of the state
Yeah.
college system, who actually makes a very good living.
Oh, yeah, I think he was making like $200,000 a year. Yeah, he was a very high-level administrator at a local community college. And that's the kind of, those are the kind of people, and I looked into other cases where I could find information on them and found a very similar demographic of people who were artistic, relatively well off.
Right. And do you think that this I don't know, sort of is class, but not just class and income, also culture as well, the cultural elite versus, you know, the working class culture world, very religious world. Is this? Do you think this is a factor that extends well beyond these particular cases? Do you think there is something representative about this?
Oh, I definitely think that that's the case. And we see that with what is happening or what has happened already to the Democratic Party, which is now the party of an extremely well-off, very well-educated group of people, artistic, and so forth.
Silicon Valley.
Yeah, Silicon Valley, right, the tech world. That's the Democratic Party, and then you have what could be called its dependents, the people who know that they're going to be the beneficiaries of the largesse that are going to be voted in by these high-level liberals. And so you're seeing that, and somewhere lost is mainstream American culture, and mid-America is not part of that group. And so there's this huge divide between the interests and the political beliefs and the ideologies and the religion or lack thereof of the highly educated and well-off elite and basically everybody else.
They have the people who will do the actual acts of punching down, the punchers at their ready disposal, such as the ACLU, which was very important in the Kim Davis case, and the other cases. The ACLU seems ready to do pro bono work for any of these kinds of claims of discrimination. And what is interesting, the thing you bring out in the essay, is that the Kim Davis case was resolved by simply developing, when a new Republican governor came in, replaced the Democrat, we had a new form created that did not require a clerk's signature. So everyone seemed to be happy. The parties were satisfied. The gay couples could get married. And Kim Davis and other clerks who had religious objections didn't have to sign off. So it's resolved. But the ACLU wasn't happy, was it?
Well, that's because the ACLU basically has much more, I don't know how to put this, a much larger goal than simply doing justice as it perceives it to the aggrieved parties, the people who can't get their marriage licenses or can't get their wedding cake made by this particular baker, Christian baker. So they basically want blanket rules. They want to basically create a situation where this kind of behavior will be outlawed, and that's what they're using the court system to do. And they also want the people the holdouts, the Kim Davises, the florists, the bakers, and so forth, to be punished so severely that no one else is going to object to providing flowers for a same-sex wedding or a wedding cake. And and they basically succeeded, because if you notice, there just aren't any more Kim Davis cases. There are no more florist cases. I think there might have been maybe one more wedding cake case. Now there's a question of having to do calligraphy on stationery for a same-sex wedding, which might call forth some First Amendment protection for artistic representation,
Freedom of expression,
expression,
and free
so
speech,
forth.
and
Because it actually is speech. It's literally speech. It's a wedding invitation. So they might have a case. So that's a new case that is actually coming forward.
Right.
But there haven't been. You can see that, and of course, in a case like the Stutzman case, where not only was there the ACLU action, but there's a private lawsuit still pending that's asking for hundreds of $1,000 worth of damages because she wouldn't provide the flowers for the wedding ceremony. So, when you're facing something like that, you either reconfigure your business so that you won't have to be in the position of supplying the flowers or the wedding cake. That is, you don't make wedding cakes anymore.
Right.
Which
Right.
is what has happened, or you go along with it because you're going to lose your retirement, your home, whatever.
Well, it seems to me that these extraordinarily punitive damages that are awarded, for instance, in the Oregon case, that party that would not participate in the wedding was fined $135,000, I believe was the amount. And it seems to me that this is so over the top that it's really not about that particular resistor.
Right.
It's really about saying nobody else better
Right.
take this path.
No.
Or I mean, this is a warning. It's not about this particular case.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely. It's basically about deterrence.
Right,
And
right.
it's worked because people don't want to be ruined financially, especially if they're not rich to begin with. If their whole livelihood is making cakes, they're not going to try to fight it.
Right.
They just aren't, even though it could well go against their beliefs. I mean, I can understand perfectly well that people might feel that their conscience is being violated by being asked to go to the effort of making this floral arrangement for this wedding, or this cake, which has to be decorated personally, might have the
Right.
names of the parties on it. I can understand that perfectly well, but I think a lot of these people, and probably many of them, do have the same Christian beliefs as the florists and bakers and Kim Davises who have been singled out. But they're not gonna ruin their lives and have.
They've got kids, they have.
And then one of the things that has happened invariably is that all the activists, the social justice warriors, the people who can feel good, get on the internet and they start writing up bad reviews on Yelp for these businesses. I mean, they basically are trying to put these people out of business by making them pariahs, saying the wedding cake gave them food poisoning or whatever. It's so there's so much at stake. I mean, it's not even the fines. It's not even the bad publicity, but the fact that your business can be ruined in so many other ways thanks to the internet.
And it seems to me that this has to be an expression of something deeper. When people get so indignant, so angry, and vitriolic, they want vengeance instead of just going a mile away to another florist. So, given that, Charlotte, I mean, going out and venting against this business on the internet, you just see an outpouring of sometimes rage and gloating when you win.
Oh yeah,
So, but what if the florist case goes away? There's got to be another place for all of that rage and indignation to go. It seems to me that there's something coming next. There's a new. There are going to have to be, in this progressive culture war. There always have to be new battles.
And there is one
draw.
already.
What
I
is
mean,
it?
it's over trans people. You can see that trans people in bathrooms and locker rooms. It's the perfect. I mean, and it's a case. I mean, gays and lesbians are a relatively small slice of the population, a tiny slice.
They are according to the CDC, they are 1.7% of the U.S. population. Transgender is 0.3% of the U.S. So about 1 in 350 people.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So suddenly this has turned into the latest crusade. And of course it's, I mean, and as you say, like if it's one, and I think I've even seen like maybe 1 in 1,000 people, I mean, an even higher figure. So these are people who are extremely rare in the population to begin with. And I'm dead sure that until recently, men who decided or thought they were women just sneaked into the ladies' room constantly because they couldn't really use the men's room. I mean, that would be, so they just did it.
And nobody
really knew, nobody cared. And that's always been my attitude. You know, if you want to go into the ladies' room, you know, I'm not looking around to, you know, at other people. And I think that's been the attitude. It's been a sort of live and let live. There are these funny people, these men who wear dresses. That's been, you know, the common attitude. They're men in dresses. They're now trans women. They're to be regarded as women. And most trans people are male to female. There are very few female to males. So it's a male phenomenon. So, okay. So suddenly it's made into this enormous civil rights issue, and of course by none other than President Obama himself, who's now issued one of his decrees decreeing that they've got to be allowed to use these restrooms.
Or lose all your money.
Yeah, or lose all your money. That's right. Since everybody's dependent on the federal government, that's a big deal. And of course, North Carolina passes this law, which was probably unnecessary, except in one context where I think it does make a difference, and it's where you're going to actually see some resistance, which is in schools. People who might not mind, you know, a trans woman using the ladies' room really mind when their daughter is taking a shower in the locker room with a pre-op, since teenagers are always pre-op, transgender woman who doesn't look the slightest bit like a woman when she's got all her clothes off. And people, that's where people, you are going to see some resistance there, and that's I think the basis of this whole Target boycott, which has actually produced some results in lowering Target stock. But there was no need, except in this school locker context, which I think is a very serious one. I think it's really serious, exposing children to things that parents would rather not have their children exposed to, and shouldn't have to have their children exposed to.
In the Virginia court case in which a court upheld the Obama Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Education decree that you have to allow a young man who thinks he's a woman go into the girls' locker room and use that. I did note in that case, this was just decided a few weeks ago, it's one of the few rulings in favor of the transgender allowance. The local school was very familiar with this young man. They created a private bathroom for him. Mirrors, place to change, his own shower. They did all the accommodations possible.
Yeah.
He and his mother said, no, I don't want to do this alone. In other words, I want to be with the girls. I want to be there. Their presence is crucial to my well-being, which says to me that the girls are involved. They're necessary to him reaching his goal of being female. And so the argument that's set, the live and let live argument, no, that actually the progressive position is we're going to push. We are going to force people to make accommodations, whether they like it or not. And
yes, and I think, well, it's very important, I think, to transgender identity to be one of the girls, so to speak.
Right.
To be, especially among adults, it's very important to pass, for example, and very upsetting when they don't pass, as often happens. And so it's very psychologically important. That's why you have this push to have them in Girl Scout troops and other groups of girls, so that otherwise it would be a sort of, there would be something kind of pointless about it, because the whole point of transgender, I think, is a very visual and performance-oriented one, performing femaleness. And so if there's no audience, you can't perform. And so I'm sure that's what was going on in this young man or woman's head. And his mother, of course, the mothers, in my opinion, are the worst offenders, because they become very
His mother
protective.
was very involved in this. There was no mention of the father.
The father
actually.
is usually in the background. I mean, sometimes he's
absent.
He's absent.
Yeah.
Sometimes he's there, but the mother, the enabling mother, is the crucial character for these kids.
And you know from your academic background that in the 1990s, when queer theory became such a powerful phenomenon, one of the key terms of that is gender performativity. The gender is something that is performed. It is something that very much is acted out. It is constructed. It is a form of they say gender identification. It's an act. And so I think that people understand very well in the advocacy world that element of being with the girls, being around other people. It's sort of a social factor that is crucial here.
Oh, I think it is. I mean, I think it's always been part of the drag scene, for example. That's pure performance, and I think that's very much part of the etiology, and it's very important. I wrote a long article for the Weekly Standard about a year ago about the whole transgender phenomenon, and it's very important, for example, to be some of these. It's very much about makeup and clothes, and about being with women and being another woman among women, and doing everything right. Holding your teacup properly, or knitting while the rest of them are knitting, and so forth. So you have to have an audience. There would be no point in being a transgender person all by yourself.
Indeed.
And so, of course, and then that means that we who are not transgender have to supply the audience, have to be the audience. And in the case of these teenagers, it's the girls. It's the girls in the class who must be there and provide validation. Right. And so it's a dreadful situation. I mean, fortunately, transgenders are a very, very, very small part of the population. So most people, 99.9% of people, are not going to be affected at all. But there will be cases where they are affected, and I really feel sorry for those girls and their parents. It strikes me as a very creepy situation.
Yeah. Those of us who are social or religious conservatives, we're in the position now of thinking, what next? What about next year? The transgender issue will be resolved. We just feel like there is something new coming.
Well, there's always something new. I mean, you know, all you have to do is go down the list of odd psychosexual behaviors, and you'll find something. Polyamory, for example, is already a subject of some agitation.
Right.
Multiple marriage. Why not?
Why shouldn't three people who are in love with one another be able to get married?
That's right, exactly. I mean, and of course it has to do a great deal to do with the redefinition of marriage that has crept up upon us. I mean, that long predated some of these phenomena, such as same-sex marriage, where marriage becomes just a sort of formalized version, a ritualized version of being with the one you love. It has little to do with family formation or sexual dimorphism, which were the old traditional bases for marriage. That wouldn't recognize same-sex marriage at all. But now that marriage has become just two people who love each other, it's a kind of sentimentalization of marriage. Naturally, you're going to get all kinds of situations where people want, 3 people who love each other, 4 people, whatever. It's going to happen.
It is going to happen.
I mean, it's already happening.
And I wonder
Yeah.
when the churches are going to end up more and more in court, in one way or another.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, you saw this with the Little Sisters of the Poor basically being coerced to provide birth control for their employees. I mean, when you have a situation like that, and basically they got no sympathy. Here are women who devote their lives selflessly to poor people, especially poor elderly people who really need a lot of help. And they've got nothing for it. Nothing, no respect.
There was no way to work out some exemption for them. There's no way for you to figure out how to avoid dragging these human beings into court.
Yeah, that's right.
Really?
And then the Solicitor General was arguing that they weren't as an order of nuns was not a religious organization.
What do you say?
Yeah, what do you say to
What do you
that?
say
I mean,
at that
and
point?
probably they got judging from the compromise ruling that the Supreme Court made, they got 4 judges to agree with that. 4 justices on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Could be 5 next year.
that's right, and it could be 5, which would mean that that order of nuns would just be stuck.
Mm-hmm.
They would have to basically stop offering services because you can't do it all yourself. They would just have to stop running their old folks' homes and doing all the stuff. Right. But that's basically what, of course, the progressive class wants, is for religion to be completely defanged, completely taken out of the public square and turned into a sort of hobby, a kind of get together in a church. It's okay, you can go to a church and have your religious service, but you cannot act in any way in public life unless you conform to our rules.
And the human cost of losing those organizations will simply have to be picked up by the state.
That's right, exactly. Then, everything will be run by the government, and we'll have, instead of being able to go to a religious old person's home or a hospice or a place, there's a place, St. Anne's in New York, which is next to Sloan Kettering Hospital and gets a lot of terminal cancer patients. My aunt died there. In this very religious setting, it's really lovely. I want to move to New York before I get too old so that I can go to St. Anne's, or maybe I'll give them a whole pile of money or something. But this lovely religious setting, that will all go and will be like the
VA.
The VA or the Dutch, where I just was reading this ghastly euthanasia case where this woman was euthanized. She wanted to be euthanized because she cleaned her house too much or something. She was obviously this poor, lonely, she was in her late 40s, lonely lady who was probably either divorced or unmarried, had no relatives, obviously. And then the euthanization consisted of these 4 professional social workers and psychiatrists going over to her home and basically injecting her. What a way to die. I mean, and that's what seems to be in store. It's the scenario that the progressives want to bring on us, where everything is administered by the state in an impersonal fashion that claims to be very solicitous. We're fulfilling your wish to die, but is actually brutal and cold. And that's basically what we're doing, and we're just removing people. I mean, just going back to the florists and the bakers who refuse to cater to same-sex marriages. We're removing these people from the scene where you can't get. I mean, even if I wanted to remarry after my husband died and go to a Christian baker for my wedding cake, I wouldn't be able to.
Right.
I wouldn't be able to make that choice to patronize to patronize a fellow Christian. And that's what we're doing. We're just taking these people out of public life, and we're reducing churches to mere places of worship.
Right. On that note, that somber note, I want to thank you, Charlotte, for joining us, and we hope to see you in our pages again soon.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah,
Okay.
well, I'd love to be there.
Okay.